Okay. Front row. Do you have a microphone? And then I'll come to you.
Tom Minney for Consultancy African Growth Partners. I was wondering, do you think Addis is really going to represent a step change in terms of capacity building for domestic resource mobilization? Because it's very much about taxes, it's about building up capital markets, it's about building simple systems for project finance. You know, to me, domestic resource mobilization is going to be a much bigger story, hopefully playing forward. And what do you think is going to be different about this year?
Thanks.
Thanks. Lorianne Robinson from the One Campaign. So the title of today's session is Will Addis Deliver? And 5 weeks out, it would be really interesting to hear from all the panelists, including Kevin. What are your thoughts on that? Are you optimistic? Do you think we'll get there?
Okay. I'm sorry. Oh, so I'm getting weird signals from the back here. Just on the. So let's take one more question here.
Jenny Yates, Programme Director at the Elders. I'm just wondering whether you see any links between the Addis Financing for Development Conference and the big Paris conference on climate change in December, and if so, what they are. Thank you.
Okay. So before throwing those questions back to the panel, I mean, if I could just add one for Romilly and Eloise, actually, that, you know, because the ambition on LDCs, you know, if you look at it in financial terms, is completely understandable in the social compact argument. There's also a counter argument, is that in that, you know, many of these countries clearly struggle to absorb aid in a productive way, and you know that, for example, Romilly, on the health numbers that you give, that, you know, if you pump those resources into the health sector, you know, some countries, you would run the risk that you're likely to bid up the price of health workers or, you know, maternal health care, rather than necessarily deliver the sort of quality of services that we all want to see. So it's the old absorptive capacity question, I guess. So there's another set of questions there. So let's start with you this time.
Okay. Just on the last one, I mean, obviously none of this is going to happen tomorrow or overnight. And I do think, we talked about, actually in the paper, we talk about investing. You know, you can't do this tomorrow, but actually if you build the systems and you build up the processes, you can do it. And absorptive capacity is an issue, but actually if you think about things like, talking about sort of universal cash transfers or universal health coverage, in some sense it's actually easier to do it on a bigger scale than it is to do it on a small scale. If you have sort of little projects here, there, or little cash transfer schemes here and there, you know, they can actually not be very efficient. But if you think nationwide and you think actually we've got to kind of invest across the board, then actually you can achieve more results. So I think that the key message is it's not about doing it tomorrow, but it's about building its capacity and investing in investing. And particularly in fragile states, I mean, there's a lot of talk about actually you can't absorb aid in fragile states, and, you know, we can't use aid because most of the poor people who are in fragile states are in mix and so on. Actually, the evidence we looked at suggested that if you do it properly, you very much can do it in fragile states. It requires a different approach and a different set of criteria and a longer term, more risks and so on. But actually, you can if you do it in the right way in fragile states. Just in terms of the other questions, will Addis deliver? I'm not optimistic. I'd like to be more optimistic than I am. It's not over yet. I think that with a big political push, you know, we've still got 5 weeks. We could see something big, and actually, you know, some summits you do see bigger, more ambitious announcements happening at the 11th hour. But my worry is that we don't have the kind of political momentum and leadership that we would need to get a really good deal in Addis, including in terms of who's actually going to the summit. So that's my worry. And I'd say if there's something that could happen tomorrow is getting some more leaders, who you were talking about, you know, finance ministers are welcome if they bring their leaders with us. But I think that's what we're going to really need. And I mean, we all know this, but this is such an important meeting in the run-up of the 2015 meetings. You know, if we get this wrong, we're going to get the whole year wrong. So I think actually that participation is going to be the really key thing. And then the links between Addis and the climate conference, Christoph, you'd probably be able to say this more. It's incredibly politically difficult, you know, in terms of which decisions are made where. I can't even remember who asked that question. But I think it's one of those sort of very difficult issues where I think there's been quite a lot of nervousness about making kind of climate finance commitments in Addis because people want to make them at Paris and so on, but you're probably better placed to answer that than me.
Crystal?
Just on this one. Yeah, so I think that is absolutely right. So there is, it is very tricky in terms of the political relationship, but at the same time, maybe not so tricky because everyone is saying climate should be in the UNFCCC. So there's all countries actually agree that it should probably not be made, commitments made in Addis on climate finance or climate finance in the narrow sense. An important objective for us is that over time, the climate world and the sustainable development and poverty eradication world get closer together, especially in the delivery mechanisms at country level, but also in simply far more systematically integrating climate considerations, call it climate smart, resilient, or whatever your favorite term for it, into all international public finance and into ODA. So that, I think, is currently there's good text in the outcome document in paragraph 58. That, I think, would be a really important element coming out of Addis, which would be supportive of a much wider effort that would support the more narrow climate-specific commitments coming out of Paris. And that would also be fitting very well with the SDGs as they are on the table, who both mainstream climate in a way, but also have this dedicated attention in a specific area. So I think that would be a very good contribution from Addis for Paris.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, just coming back to your challenge, Kevin, I would say 2 points on Liberia. I'd come back to the outline you gave us at the beginning about the plans that are in place there and costed and could be deployed. And I would support everything that Romney said about, obviously it's not for tomorrow, but a lot of countries do have these plans. And also the lessons of the Ebola crisis. The world came to that too late. Obviously, that was a big international mobilization, but there were thousands upon thousands of community workers, local and from Africa, who had to have contact points with every community in the country because David Nabarro would say it wasn't one Ebola outbreak, it was about 200 separate ones. And so I think when you look at what human capacity can do, yes, it was a scramble. Yes, it was a crisis, but it does show that even in a country with such a fragile system, a non-existent, really embryonic health system, everything could be put in place to tackle that disease. And I think we should, for all of the lateness and the people that died and the tragedy of it, there's also quite a kind of positive set of lessons to learn about how we organise and how we deploy to save lives and get essential services to people very quickly. So I would just sort of flag that. And then in success in Addis, it absolutely can be a success if we all do our jobs. I think we've got 5 weeks. There's been campaigns that have run in less time. We have to take it to the leaders. We have to take it to them and make our demands clear and show what the deliverables can be. And, I think that it's incumbent on us to absolutely do that. And all the time, we're hearing more and more about different leaders considering going. There are CEOs going. I mean, leadership of businesses have understood that this is a huge opportunity. Then our political leaders should also understand that. So I think we need to make this a race to the top. We have next week to get some ambitious outcomes in the communique. We're working on deliverables for on the day, and I hope that working together we can make it a big success.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to take one very quick last round and then ask the speakers to both wrap up and respond to specific questions. So please.
Hello, thank you. Cordelia Lonsdale, Development Initiatives. Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, two great reports, and thanks to Christoph as well for taking the time out to come and speak with us today. I wanted to just unpack a little more, give Eloise a chance to unpack a little more as well, the targets to LDCs, because one thing that always strikes me and has struck me in the New York negotiations is how much the group of LDCs is sort of talked about as if it's homogeneous, and that's obviously because they negotiate as a bloc, but within that bloc, you have a very different set of countries. We're working at DI on our global humanitarian assistance report, and something else that I think you guys have all touched on, but I'd like to hear more about, is what is the involvement of the humanitarian community in delivering this funding? How do we ensure, I guess, more policy coherence right from the top down within the UN system to get humanitarian actors delivering short-term aid and actors delivering long-term aid to sort of talk to each other and make Addis link in with the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016.
Thanks, Cordelia. Any other last questions?
Thanks very much. Marcus Cox here from the company Agulhas Applied Knowledge. It strikes me that the idea of the global social compact, with its sort of very tight focus on health, education and income poverty, looks very much like the old MDGs. It's a nice sort of tight thing that you can cost and finance and mobilize around. It's very different from the SDGs with this very broad, pluralistic agenda, lots and lots of sort of niche interest reflected, and potentially a much more sort of fragmented development policy agenda that comes out of it. I'm wondering if you think that the SDGs are unhelpful for the achievement of a global social compact.
I think that's the subject for another whole day conference, actually.
Question for Christoph. At the moment, it's
Ed
Davey, Prince of Wales's International Sustainability Unit. At the moment, it's Secretary of State Greening who's going, I understand. Is there any scope for additional ministers to go from Treasury, etc., or is that set in, or is someone from Treasury already going?
Okay, so if you just each of them take an opportunity to address whichever of those questions you want to, but I guess one that really stands out, that a lot of the countries that we're talking about are conflict affected, or parts of the country are conflict affected. I mean, DRC would be a prime example. So there's a very distinctive challenge there, and it would be good if you could address that as well in your closing remarks. Elise, should we start with you?
Yes. So thank you for that question. You're right, they are very, very diverse, but they also include, we've got this, one of our favourite graphs, if you're allowed to have favourites among your children, is this Venn diagram which helpfully shows the LDCs, low-income countries, fragile states, and the overlap. So many of those are actually captured within the least developed countries. And of course, the 50% target leaves 50% for everybody else. So it's really a political tool to really get that spending in the right direction. And excellent point on the humanitarian issue. And I think that's something that we all need to make sure that the linkages are very obvious when we have the final outcome in Addis. And just to say, it's been a real pleasure today. Thank you to ODI. Thanks for the excellent questions. Thank you for DFID for Namaste and Om Shanti for hearing me out on 50%. Please do take the, we love you dearly, but we'd like you to do it. And just, if I may, just a huge shout out to Isabel and Catherine from my team, who along with Sarah Harcourt worked a lot on this report. So thanks to you.
Thanks. Address the SDG question as well. I mean, if I could express it in a different way, that, are we in danger of peddling the old MDG framework and not really responding to the bold new world of the SDGs?
I mean, I would put it the other way, that are we in danger of focusing so much on the bold new world of the SDGs that we forget actually some of the things that we know are actually quite effective in the MDG framework? And it may not be very helpful, but, to me it is both and. I mean, you need to, the SDGs are incredibly useful, particularly the S point in it, and I very much agree with Christoph about bringing those communities together. In fact, when we started writing this report, we were trying to do that, and we kind of somehow, our brains exploded and we couldn't manage to do it. But I think it's I think that's incredibly helpful, that the wider framing, particularly the SDG framing, I think some of the universal framing is incredibly important. And also looking at wider sources of flows and all the rest of it is very important. But let's not forget, there's still a large number of people living in poverty. We actually have a lot of evidence about how to tackle those people. We have a lot of evidence about what works, and I think one of the rationales for us in actually writing this report is that people would be sort of so busy jumping on the next bandwagon and the next big exciting thing that they'd actually forget about what's actually really critical, and we need to keep doing and do in slightly different ways in some contexts. In terms of the humanitarian point, I mean, I really agree. We need to very much reduce the reliance on short-term humanitarian channels. I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is that you often have humanitarian agencies coming in and then actually doing sort of quasi-development type projects over a much longer time period, but actually not being very integrated into the sort of development aid system. So as I say, I'm not an expert, but I do think that's something that could very helpfully be tackled, particularly with the federal state lens. So I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Christoph.
Yes, just pick up on a few questions. Still had the TA on tax, so just to, yes, I do think that is one of the areas where it actually could make a real jump in emphasis on that. So I think that's a good one. On the social compact and the MDG, and also is it a real or not? I also think that in the new SDG world, it is very important to have a very clear emphasis on the what's not new, the old things that are as relevant as they were before. So I think whether it in the end will be the social compact, because I agree it might be at risk of not delivering a tangible thing, but that emphasis, and also that you probably have seen the post-2015 CO draft, which in the preamble, in the first paragraph, includes leave no one behind. So that emphasis and the emphasis on extreme poverty prominently across the documents and across the notions is, particularly in the context of that wider framework, is really, really important. And then, of course, you have the full development finance framework that needs to finance all the SDGs and all the national development plans. But keeping that in balance, I think, is very important, and the social compact notion or similar notions are helpful for that. On humanitarian, that's an interesting way of also looking at, for instance, will Addis deliver that question? So will it deliver shiny outcomes? Probably not too many. We also still hope, including in terms of announceables at the day itself, not just in the outcome document. But may it help to get good discussions going, for instance, on the relationship of development finance and humanitarian finance. There's one paragraph which is really new in that context, in the outcome document, which speaks precisely to that, how the instruments can come closer together, links it back to the World Humanitarian Summit. And that helps, for instance, our policy leads on humanitarian finance in DFID to have conversations with other countries about that in a much more in-depth way. So it is this slight type of moving the agenda forward, which is not spectacular, but on that level, I think there's still quite a lot of good things in the outcome document, which will hopefully work over time and develop over time and also become more specific over time. So that was a little bit on both humanitarian and will it deliver. UK delegation, yes, currently we expect Secretary of State, but we never know what happens, so we'll see.
Okay, look, just to wrap up, I mean, it does seem to me that there are some differences, but a huge amount of agreement across the panel and across the audience, actually. And one of the take-home messages for me, not just from this meeting, but more broadly, is that we really have to get better organising for Addis and thinking about how we can collectively work together to shape the outcome. And, it's actually really distressing in a way that if you think back to some earlier periods when we had these huge public mobilisations, around HIPC and Drop the Debt and that sort of thing, that really we don't have that energy and mobilisation at the moment. And speaking at a personal level, and just responding to the question I was asked, I actually think this is a moment of huge opportunity, and that wording, as you said, the fact that nobody left behind is right up there. It's both a great thing, and it's a danger. And the danger is it'll become like phrases like pro-poor growth or inclusive development, that everyone signs up for it. No one has the faintest idea what it means, and certainly nobody intends to adjust their policies to actually target people who are being left behind. And I think the challenge is to really turn it into something real, and Addis is an opportunity to do that. And it does strike me, and it's why I think that question on the MDGs and SDGs is so pertinent, that, that we know the SDG is going to set a very high level of ambition, that many of the targets are arithmetically implausible, and so on. But that aside, we're actually heading for a world where, if we carry on business as usual, we'll have at least 4 million child deaths in 2030. On the basis of your scenarios, at least 400 to 600 million people living below the poverty line. Out of school numbers are going up. That's for primary school age children, not going down. And we're setting a target for universal secondary education. And really, this does come down to, can we start harnessing resources and policies to really target people who are at the wrong end of the distribution? And Addis is an opportunity to do that on both sides, I think. On the sides of the LDC governments, who, let's face it, have a pretty shocking record on inequality in their own rights, and on the part of the donor community. I do think also, and I think, I can't remember who asked this question, but these big summits, I think they're all different, but they're intimately linked with each other. And if we get Addis wrong, it's going to make a mockery of the SDG meeting, and it's also going to make a mockery of the Paris meeting. That if we can't mobilise development financing for adaptation and climate resilience, it has huge implications for all of the SDG targets. And I think whether we like it or not, there are tensions and trade-offs here. This is the same basket. I mean, some of the resources are a bit different on carbon abatement, but certainly on adaptation, these resources will be contested. So I guess my take is that, this is going to be what we make of it in the end. And I think all of us, whether as researchers in ODI or campaigners out there or in academia or government, we could all do better, and we'll do better by working together to make a difference. So I'll leave it there. Not to end on a pessimistic note, we do actually have wine in the for those of you who are feeling down in the dumps, and you can have a glass of wine, look at the beautiful graphics, and so thanks to all of you for coming.